Good evening and welcome to Reproaction's monthly Act and Learn webinar. Tonight our topic is Who is Closing Abortion Clinics? It's a look at our new campaign. So we're very excited that you're here to join us. Who are these voices? The first voice you hear is me, one of your hosts, Erin Matson. I am one of the co-founders and co-directors of Reproaction, and I'm based in Arlington, Virginia.
And my name is Pamela Merritt. I am the other co-founder and co-director of Reproaction, and I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri.
And we are so excited you're here tonight. So thank you so much for joining. So a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you have questions, feel free to chat them into your questions box at any point during the presentation. We will get to as many of them as possible at the end. First, we're going to introduce Reproaction. Then we're going to talk about TRAP laws. What are they? Targeted Regulation of Abortion Providers laws. So after that, we'll take a look at the big abortion case in front of the Supreme Court, Whole Woman's Health v. Hellerstedt. And we'll be doing that with Rupali Sharma from Center for Reproductive Rights, who's joining us by advanced remarks. After that, we'll look at our Who is Closing Abortion Clinics campaign that Reproaction is running. And with that, we'll be joined with Katie O'Connell, who's our campaign lead here at Reproaction. After that, we'll talk with our next panelist, Parke, who's going from Political Research Associates, who's going to help us understand the radical right better. And then to close it up with our panelists, we'll have Alena Yarmosky from NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia, who's going to talk a bit about fighting back locally and innovative things that you can do no matter where you live and what your legislature looks like. After that, we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll do as much Q&A as possible at the end for the panelists or anyone you want to talk to. So we encourage you to type your questions into the chat box as you get them, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. Also want to encourage folks who like to live tweet to please do so. You can use the hashtag #KeepClinicsOpen. So a bit about Reproactions. We are a new direct action group forming to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're incredibly proud of our left flank analysis. We have a willingness to hold folks on all sides accountable to increasing access to abortion and advancing reproductive justice, whether they're traditionally thought of as our allies or our opposition. Another thing that makes us different and that we're very proud of is our commitment to nonviolent direct action. So what are TRAP laws? TRAP laws are targeted regulations of abortion providers. These are also sometimes called abortion clinic closure laws or clinic shutdown laws. This is one of the primary ways that access to abortion is being decimated around the country, particularly at the state level today in the United States. With that, I'm going to try out showing NARAL Pro-Choice America's TRAP laws video, which is really excellent. And so I'll just call that up right now.
We've all been trapped in traffic, maybe in an elevator on a bad date. No, just me. Let's talk about a place with a pretty big trap that's impacting a whole lot of women. Texas. Remember Wendy Davis in the pink sneakers, filibustering for 11 hours, fighting for our right to make our own choices about our own bodies. She fought this extremist bill as long as she could, but eventually it became a law that closed more than half of the abortion clinics across the state. It's called a trap, and it's a trick used by anti-choice activists across the country. They passed a series of medically unnecessary regulations that make it almost impossible for women to access abortion while pretending the laws are protecting women's health. Shady, right? These laws make up restrictions that sound like they're good for women, but have nothing to do with actual health or safety. They're demanding things like the hallway should be this wide, the janitor's closet this big, the grass should be this long, because apparently it's dangerous for women's health if there are a few weeds on the front lawn. The law also requires that doctors who perform abortions have a special agreement with nearby hospitals, allowing them to admit their patients. Sounds good, right? But this is also a trap. Most hospitals refuse to grant these privileges because they just don't have to. These laws are doing exactly what they're designed to do, make it impossible for clinics to be open, leaving millions of women across the country without access to reproductive health care. And now, the Supreme Court is about to decide whether Texas is allowed to get away with this or not. If Texas can get away with it, other states can too. Angry yet? You should be. American women have had the right to an abortion since Roe v. Wade was decided back in 1973. And over the past 40 years, we've seen that when we have control of our own bodies, we can go a whole lot further in life. And now we can do incredible things like fight on the front lines, run the country, and wear pants at work. We've fought long and hard to get to a place where our personal decisions about how and when to build our families get to stay just that, personal. We have to flex some muscle here. 7 in 10 Americans believe we should have the right to an abortion. So how do we end this anti-choice trap? Know what's happening. Sign up. Speak up. Become part of the movement to make sure that if one of us is trapped, we all stand together to pull each other free. If you didn't know about this stuff, your friends probably don't either. And we're stronger when we all have our eyes open. So please, share this.
So thank you to NARAL Pro-Choice America for that great video. As you see, trap laws are ridiculous laws that do nothing to promote women's health and safety like the opposition often claims, but rather do things like regulate clinics out of existence. So just briefly before I pass it over to Pamela, who's going to be diving into this deeper with Rupali via advanced remarks, a quick look at the impact of forcing abortion clinics to close. 22 states have already passed laws aimed at forcing abortion clinics to close, and dozens more are considering it. 5 states in this country are down to just one abortion provider: Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. Legal abortion is increasingly becoming a right only for the wealthy in this country, and we know that that's not race blind. It's becoming a right particularly for wealthy white women. Meanwhile, more and more women are turning to home abortions and taking matters into their own hands. And disturbingly, they are increasingly being criminalized for it, contrary to the loud protestations from the pro-life movement that it doesn't want to punish people who have abortions. There's a woman in Indiana, Purvi Patel, who's currently serving 20 years in prison behind bars. Kenlecia Jones in Georgia was handcuffed after using medication abortion on her own. And we had a tragic case in Tennessee recently, Anna Yoka, who attempted to self-abort using a coat hanger in a tub, and she's been charged with criminal charges. So that is the state of abortion access today. It is increasingly becoming a humanitarian crisis. This is a very important struggle in front of the Supreme Court right now. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Pamela, who's going to dig in more about the case facing the Supreme Court.
Thank you so much, Erin. Excuse me. So I'm going to be reading prepared remarks from Rupali Sharma with the Center for Reproductive Rights. Rupali joined the Center for Reproductive Rights in 2014. She first worked at the center from 2012 to 2013 as a legal fellow in the Europe program, where she helped develop a case challenging a national abortion ban. Rupali holds a JD from Yale Law School, where she helped local residents secure asylum as a director of the Immigration Legal Services Clinic. And I should mention that the center is representing whole women's health. Erin, next slide. So what is whole women's health versus Hellerstedt? Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt challenges two provisions in HB2, an omnibus abortion law enacted by Texas in July 2013. The first provision requires abortion providers to have admitting privileges at a local hospital, even though privileges are often granted or denied for reasons other than competency, including economic incentives. As a result, countless Texas providers have been denied privileges regardless of their stellar credentials, which in turn has shuttered over half of the clinics in the state. The second provision forces abortion facilities to comply with the criteria of ambulatory surgery centers, ASCs, which offer more complex medically riskier procedures than abortion and are therefore subject to more onerous regulation. To comply with this regulation, abortion facilities would have to expend somewhere between $1 to $3 million, which they simply do not have. As a result, if each of the provisions were to go fully into effect, Texas, the second most populous state in the country, would be left with 10 or fewer abortion facilities. Texas has consistently claimed that the challenged restrictions are meant to protect women's health. In August 2014, a federal district court found that far from promoting women's well-being, they harmed women's health by curtailing abortion access. So much so that women are traveling increasingly farther distances and facing 2 to 3 week wait times just for an appointment. Given the law's inability to further a legitimate state interest and unprecedented impact on abortion access, the court held that they violated a woman's fundamental right to end a pregnancy under the 14th Amendment. The case has been fully briefed and argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, and we are hopeful that it will strike each of the restrictions down as unconstitutional shams. The stakes are incredibly high for at least 3 reasons. First, there are over 5.4 million women of reproductive age in Texas and living under this regime. Some have been forced to carry to term, and others have resorted to self-abortion. Second, a loss at the Supreme Court would give anti-choice legislatures carte blanche to pass laws that deprive women of their fundamental rights on the pretext of protecting them. At least 8 other states have enacted admitting privilege laws, and 5 states have comparable ASC requirements, though Texas is the most draconian. Finally, an unfavorable ruling would do real damage to the law, even outside of abortion rights, as it would suggest that governments may burden time-honored fundamental rights without even having to demonstrate that they serve a valid state interest. And with that, I will turn it back over to Erin.
Thanks, Pamela. So I am unmuting Katie right now. So Katie O'Connell is our campaign lead at Reproaction. Katie has been a reproductive justice activist since her sophomore year at James Madison University. She founded the only reproductive justice group on campus and has dealt with her share of antis because of it. Since then, she worked at the National Abortion Federation Hotline Fund and Planned Parenthood. She's a proud dog mom to a rescue hound and lives with her partner in Alexandria. And we are so excited that both Katie is on staff and also that she is presenting here tonight. So thank you so much for joining, Katie.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So just a content note for folks. I'm going to be sharing some of the graphic images from our campaign as Katie is speaking, but she will be speaking directly to the questions, so, and not necessarily to the visuals. We just want to show you the great stuff that we've got. So my first question to you, Katie, is if you could explain the Who is Closing Abortion Clinics campaign.
Yeah, so the campaign is designed to expose who pro-life activists really are, and it's done through catchy and quippy social media graphics, which are really meant to capture attention and bring to light the beliefs and practices of the amici who submitted 34 briefs in support of the state of Texas and the Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt case. So our tone is really bright and loud and apologetic. And through the campaign, we have social graphics, mini articles, and quotes, many of which link to short, or some of these actually link to short articles, which really expand on what we're saying. And the quotes that we've chosen to highlight are just kind of a sampling that shows the true absurdity of these pro-life arguments. So for example, one of them is a hypothetical about what would have happened if Padme Amidala had had an abortion. And it's just kind of a really ludicrous quote from one of the more absurd briefs that was submitted. So we're combining our overall website, which is full of this content, with social media postings and an ad buy that is going to come up, and we're going to use that to target politically active young people.
Great. So my next question for you, Katie, is who is closing abortion clinics? Or in other words, who is the opposition that we're up against?
So just sort of like a brief note about what we did is we read all of the briefs. We did sort of a deep dive as far as research goes into all of these organizations, and we also looked at their legal representation because in some cases the legal representation is really key. So for example, Americans United for Life created a template law that HB2, the clinic closure law, is modeled on. And they didn't submit a brief on their own behalf. Instead, their legal team drafted a brief on behalf of another group. So overall, the opposition are liars, sexist, and terrorists. And that's really the drumbeat that we consistently have on the site. In their statements to the media, they have tried to present themselves as very legitimate actors. And so with the site, we're trying to paint them with this broad brush to show that they're radical and fringe groups. So the opposition says that they care about women, that they want to protect women, and even some of them say that they're feminists. And all of this is meant to obscure their true intentions, which is where the lie piece comes in. So when we say that they're liars, we're really talking about a lot of them and the myths that the briefs are chock full of. But more specifically, we're referring to organizations like Live Action, who submitted a brief. And Live Action, briefly, is a group founded by a woman named Lila Rose. And they are, I guess, notorious for going into Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers and filming themselves as patients asking very pointed questions in the facilities. So similar to the videos that were released by David Daleiden and the Center for Medical Progress this past summer, alleging that Planned Parenthood was selling fetal tissue, which it was not doing. Their videos are heavily edited to implicate wrongdoing on the part of the abortion providers that they're filming. And many legitimate media outlets have proved that their recordings are falsified. So another set of lies that many of these organizations put forth are about men. Some say that women end up depressed and suicidal. Others claim women always regret their abortions. Several briefs mention a disproven link between abortion and breast cancer. And so these are the lies that we're really seeking to expose on the site. And we really want to contextualize their claims that HB2 protects women alongside these other lies. Because our sort of thesis is that if these pro-life groups are lying about all the claims that they're making in these briefs that they actually submitted to the Supreme Court, and their defense of HB2 rests on those lies, it's really clear that the major argument about HB2 and the fact that they say it protects women is false. And so for when we say that they're terrorists, this is really talking about one group who submitted an amici brief who is very related to other groups like Live Action. They work very closely together. They work with Live Action and Priests for Life, and that group is Operation Rescue. And they are unique, I guess, in several ways. They're the organization that held protests outside of Dr. George Tiller's Wichita clinic for years. After Dr. Tiller's murder, they found the phone number of the senior vice president of Operation Rescue in his murderer's car. And she said that she was actually giving him information about Tiller's movements and whereabouts, even though she says she didn't realize he was going to kill him. And previously, this same woman actually served 2 years in prison for plotting to bomb an abortion clinic. Their president, Troy Newman, has publicly written in a book that abortion providers should be executed and that women who have abortions should be criminalized. So when we're saying that they're liars, sexists, and terrorists, like this is really where the terrorism piece comes in. These people incite anti-abortion violence or pro-life violence regularly. And their president, Troy Newman, is actually serving on Ted Cruz's pro-life committee. So they've really been trying to establish themselves as a legitimate organization. And so we really want to single them out as terrorists because it undercuts their argument that the law is intended to protect women, as the safety of women having abortions is not something they've ever considered before.
Katie, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay,
all right.
Great.
Yeah.
That's okay. Is there more you want to add about the opposition?
I think that really sums it up. Also, I guess in terms of the idea that they're sexist, it's just very, first of all, it's very paternalistic to say that they want to protect women. And the other thing is like when they call themselves feminists, it's just like a complete falsehood to say that you can be a pro-life feminist. If you are working against people having autonomy over their own bodies, you simply cannot say that you're a feminist. And in fact, you are the opposite, right? You are somebody who is sexist and does not want women to have full equality.
Preach. So my last question for you, and we've got about 3 minutes before we're going to move on to Nicole, is what are their arguments and why are they fundamentally deceitful?
So I will go through these really quickly, and we only have about 3 minutes. But there's basically 3 main arguments that are throughout all the briefs. The first one is that the bill protects women. The second is that it does not impose an undue burden on folks accessing abortion care. And the third is that HB 2 is necessary because of the Kermit Gosnell case in Pennsylvania. So to talk about why these are deceitful, the main theme was that HB 2 protects women by requiring the admission privileges and the ambulatory surgical center requirements. And I'm going to touch on Gosnell in just a few seconds, but the argument with the ASC requirements is that it would allow things like stretchers to get through the clinic and prevent things that were issues at Gosnell's clinic. But of course, like these are things that abortion providers are already doing to protect safety. They're already making sure that if necessary, and it is often not necessary, stretchers can get through, that their fire alarms are working. And these requirements actually even stipulate at what angle water should flow out of a water fountain. Really not something that is designed for safety purposes, because I really doubt that anyone has ever been harmed by the direction water flows out of a fountain. It's just another way of restricting access to abortion. And so the idea that saying that this protects women is actually completely deceitful, because women are harmed by a lack of access to abortion care, and that has led between 100,000 and 240,000 women to attempt to self-abort without a physician's care in Texas. So the fact that it doesn't they say that it doesn't put an undue burden on people who have abortions is also false, because women in Texas now have to travel at least 150 miles per provider. Some people have to travel as many as 500 miles, which adds time, money, and the idea that it's not an undue burden is really ignoring the realities of people's lives. Low-income Latino women are disproportionately impacted by the law, and the fact that they the MEC blatantly don't care about what this law means for women is something that we're really spotlighting on the site. And then finally, there's the charges that it prevents another Gazanel from occurring. And the people who drafted the law said they did so in the wake of the atrocities at Gosnell's clinic. But many experts have said the issue with Gosnell was a lack of regulation, but actually state enforcement. So organizations like the National Abortion Federation refused to work with Gosnell and certify him, but the state wasn't doing its job in his facility. And the Gosnell could operate the way he did, advantage of low-income women and women of color because of the abortion access crisis in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. None of the stipulations in HB2 would prevent another Gosnell, but the clinic closures that result from the law creates the perfect storm of conditions to allow doctors like him to predate on women.
Katie, thank you so much for this wealth of information, and I hope everyone will go to whoisclosingabortionclinics.org and look at how she has distilled this information into, really compelling, shareable content. Thank you, and please feel free to type your questions for her in the chat box. I'm going to put Katie on mute now and unmute Cole and pass it over to Pamela.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So joining us now is Cole Parke. Cole works with the Political Research Associates, a small progressive think tank located in Boston, Mass. As PRA's LGBTQ and gender justice researcher, Cole largely concentrates on tracking right-wing evangelical Christians in the U.S. and the role they play in the exportation of politicized homophobia and transphobia around the world. Through that research, Cole endeavors to support on-the-ground organizers and activists in developing more strategic approaches to the work of creating a safer and more just world for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. Welcome, Cole.
Hi, Pamela.
So I'm going to dive right in with our questions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great.
So my first question is, tell us more about the intersection of the anti-LGBTQ movement and the anti-abortion movement.
Sure. So a lot of times we find that there isn't a lot of dialogue and crossover on our side of things between LGBTQ justice work and reproductive justice work, not to mention various other struggles for a more just world. And what's especially difficult is that whether we find common cause in our mutual struggles, the right often puts us in the same bucket, and so that alone is reason enough in my mind for us to begin communicating and talking about what it is that we share. And the reality is that there's a lot between, in particular, LGBTQ justice work and reproductive justice work. Just to kind of highlight a handful of those shared mutual struggles, I'll say that one in particular is the religious roots of the oppression that many of us experience. And we've especially seen how that has played out in the redefinition and manipulation of religious freedom. And so Hobby Lobby is one example of that. We're also seeing that play out, however, in other instances, like in the case of Kim Davis, who was a county clerk in Kentucky who determined that her deeply held religious convictions as a conservative Christian should prevent her from being required to offer marriage licenses to same-sex couples. So we continue to bump up against this blurriness between the separation, or what should be the separation between church and state. And that's affecting both LGBTQ and reproductive justice struggles. There are also, and I should, as a side note, political research has a wealth of information on our website, which is simply politicalresearch.org. including a recent report called When Exemption is the Rule, the Religious Freedom Strategy of the Christian Right. So all of that is available for free on our website. You should feel free to check it out. Additionally, between LGBTQ and reproductive justice, there is a manipulation of shame that is a really easy point of connection between these communities. To simply ask somebody, like, tell me about a time you've experienced shame in your life, and to find common cause there. Then also restrictions on bodily autonomy, on self-determination, and the various ways in which those restrictions play out. So, for example, through respectability politics, through the silencing or denying of our lived realities, also through barriers to information and access. Those are things that affect both LGBTQ and reproductive justice struggles. Similarly, and this especially speaks to the experience of trans folk, is the fallacy of choice, and the assumption of consistency or a fixed status when a person determines one path, and may or may not decide to stay with that path in the future. For example, if somebody chooses not to have an abortion at one stage in their life and they choose to have an abortion later in life, or vice versa. And finally, the medicalization is part of what we see playing out for LGBTQ folks, as well as as was described with the trap laws previously.
Got it. Thank you. So what is a good framework for understanding the radical right?
So there's a lot of conversation about the religious right, and that's often, oftentimes the religious right functions, especially in the anti-choice, anti-abortion world, as the spokespeople at the front of the line. What exists in reality is a trifecta between religion, the economy, and the government. So it's important to note that the Christian right makes up the largest voting bloc in the Republican Party, and so that serves to create a tremendous amount of power in government. And I think that, returning again to Hobby Lobby, that here we have a case of the Green family, the owners of that corporation, who are conservative Christians, and so there's the religious piece. Hobby Lobby is a business, but it's owned by this religious family, and they utilize the government through the Supreme Court to assert their beliefs into public policy. And so it's important to pay attention to how those three things are relating or not relating in some cases, and to figure out, and this is a little bit getting ahead, but can we interject and disrupt some of those relationships that are ultimately problematic and dangerous to our rights?
Got it. That's very helpful. So one final question. Your career is dedicated to studying people who spread hate and push laws that restrict civil and human rights. What are effective strategies for stopping them? And I think you were talking about a few.
Well, one important piece is to be mindful of self-care in the midst of any of this sort of work, and having little furry animals around is a good strategy, so cheers to that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the right often gets intersectionality better than we do, and the emergence of race and sex selective abortion acts, or PRENDA at the federal level, that's an example of how the right is manipulating gender equality or racial equality to push forward policies that ultimately harm not only people who might be seeking abortion, but also are deeply racist and sexist at their core. And so we need to be doing a better job of articulating where our common cause is, and building those coalitions. And part of that is going to necessitate a recentering of who the most marginalized in our communities are. And so realizing that much of the, especially the larger nonprofits in this work, have kind of centralized the needs and expectations of white folk, of people with economic privilege, and we need to disrupt that. And so there's internal work to do as well as the external resistance work to do.
Got it. Thank you so much for your work, Cole. And we will hold questions for Cole until we get to the Q&A section of the webinar. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Erin?
Yes, and Cole, I just want to extend a personal thanks for your understanding of my esteemed colleague, Sancho Panza, who is being annoying right now. He is a good dog, but he likes to bark. So hopefully he's been addressed now. So next we're going to move to Alena Yarmosky, who is joining us from NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. She's the Director of Advocacy and Communications, and she's based in Northern Virginia. Alena oversees NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia's internal and external communications and manages its advocacy, electoral, and issue-based campaigns. She works closely with many volunteers and student activists and was responsible for conducting a groundbreaking year-long undercover investigation into Virginia's crisis pregnancy centers. She headed up NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia's 2013 election work and managed an extensive field program to defeat Ken Cuccinelli and elect pro-choice candidates up and down the ballot in November. In short, Alena rocks, and we're so excited to have her with us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Alena.
Thanks, Erin. I'm so happy to be here. Really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, so this is great because I think Virginia's story is something I suspect not everyone on this call knows. So my first question for you is that Virginia has an abortion clinic closure law, but there has also been some success in making it less harmful since it was first passed. So I'd like you to explain to us what happened in Virginia.
Yes, thank you. So we are fortunate in Virginia that we are currently the only state that is making regulatory progress towards rolling back our clinic shutdown law in Virginia. And it's really because we have a unique situation here. And the reason is, when you think of these clinic shutdown laws, a lot of people think of Texas or similar cases where the law is actually, where all of the restrictions, things like wider hallways, things like number of parking spots that an abortion provider has to have in order to remain open, in most cases, those are written into the code. However, in Virginia, in order for them to pass this law, which they did in 2011, they did it as a really last-minute sneaky amendment. And so what they did is they basically directed the Virginia Department of Health to make new regulations, but they didn't actually specify what those regulations were going to be in the code. So because of that, we had a regulatory process that started in 2011 when we had a Republican anti-choice dominated Senate, House, and we had then Governor McDonnell in office. And from 2011 through 2013, the Virginia Board of Health was having meeting after meeting and essentially writing a clinic shutdown restrictions. In its final form, these restrictions, like other restrictions in other states. So, for example, like I said, there were the architectural requirements for new abortion providers, and things like that, which would make it impossible for existing abortion providers to stay open. And in 2013, we were looking at having over a dozen of our abortion providers across the state close, and a majority, which would be a majority of our abortion providers. So we were looking at probably going down from around 20 providers at that time to around 5. Then in 2013, as Aaron mentioned, we had a big election year, and for those of you who don't know Ken Cuccinelli, you're super lucky. He's the worst. But thankfully, we were able to elect Governor McAuliffe, who is a pro-choice governor. And what he did, because again, our shutdown restrictions are in regulation form and not in the law already, he directed the Board of Health to do a review of those regulations. And he did that in the spring of 2014, so as soon as he took office. From then on, advocates across the state joined together, and we actually submitted over 10,000 comments from Virginians to the Department of Health and to the Commissioner of Health, asking her to recommend that we amend the restrictions. She took that recommendation, and last fall, I should say, September of 2015, the Board of Health officially voted to adopt amendments to our clinic shutdown restrictions. So where we are right now, this process is still ongoing. It's a multi-year process, so it takes a few years to sort of do any changes when it comes to regulation. But where we are right now is that we have a Board of Health meeting in September, and we expect to have the votes to be able to officially make these amendments permanent, which will essentially mean that existing abortion providers in Virginia do not have to comply with these medically inappropriate architectural standards, which means many of them will be able to stay open, which is a huge victory. While this process has been going on, the Commissioner of Health has been granting waivers to these abortion providers to they do not have to comply with these most burdensome of the restrictions, which has been great. However, September's vote would make this a permanent change. So this is a huge victory for women in Virginia. I'm going to just sort of, unfortunately, give sort of the other side of the story, which is that, again, our position is unique. We're pretty lucky that we have regulations as opposed to these restrictions being written into our law. But also, even going forward with these new amendments, because legally we are bound to have restrictions on abortion providers as directed by the legislature, we still have, even though they are much better than they could be, we still have medically inappropriate restrictions for only abortion providers, and they're applied differently than they would be applied to other similar medical providers. So we're still in a situation in Virginia where abortion providers are treated differently. And if a new abortion provider wanted to move into the state of Virginia, regardless of whether they were doing medication abortion or surgical abortion, they would still have to open up an ambulatory surgical center. So that's just completely inconsistent with the medical reality of abortion. So we still have a lot of work to do, but we did make some progress, which we're excited about.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I think it's great that you're on this webinar is because Virginia is a state with a conservative legislature, and still there's been some progress on the law. And so clearly it's still really bad. But I do want to ask you, from your perspective, what do you think people who live in states with these clinic shutdown laws or that are considering them should know?
So the most important thing is don't give up, right? One of my biggest pet peeves, and I know a lot of us on this call are from, quote unquote, red states. I think there's so much important work happening in these states, and a lot of it is happening at the state level. And so we need to obviously stand up and refuse to be dismissed. So make sure that you don't give up and feel like all hope is lost, because it's not. Again, like I said, Virginia is a unique situation, and so some pieces, like in Texas, you're not going to be able to do amendments that we were able to. There are so many ways that you can fight back, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be on this webinar, because Reproaction is really sort of taking the fight to the streets, and there's just so many different advocacy ways that you can go about it. The most important, I think, is sort of just what that video said from NARAL Pro-Choice America, that so many people don't really know about these laws. These laws are really difficult to understand, and the other side really uses that to their advantage by making them confusing and making them sound reasonable. So simply getting out and talking about them, making sure your neighbors and your friends understand the stake here, and that these are fundamentally sham laws, is one of the most important things that you can do. Obviously, there's other states fighting back in the courts, which is a completely different avenue, but still super important. And obviously, that's the Supreme Court case that we were talking about before. There's ways to fight back, as I said, with advocacy online and offline, and just making sure that abortion providers in your state know that you support them and that you are reaching out and doing what you can to help them out and see what they need. So there's a lot of great clinic defense work that goes on. I've spoken to a lot of abortion providers in Virginia, and when you're under this type of pressure constantly from the legislature, it's so important to know that you have people in your community that will stand up for you and support you and help you. So even just sending a thank you note to an abortion provider, standing out there on a Saturday morning when they really need you, can be incredibly effective. Erin, are you still there?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I muted myself because of my esteemed colleague, the small dog with Parke. Can you hear me now? We really should bring him along to some of these state legislatures because I think he would do a lot of good. Anyway, so the fights are increasingly moving to a municipal level, and we've just got a minute for this, but I do want to ask you about this because there's been fights at the local level in Virginia, and I'd be interested for you to briefly outline kind of what's been happening and how activists have fought back. This isn't just a state level issue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin, and I'll try and keep this quick. In 2013, right when this election was sort of playing out in the fall, we found out that Fairfax City, which is a fairly progressive place, was about to pass a zoning ordinance. And essentially we call this zoning ordinance local track or local clinic shutdown laws. And what this said was like trap restrictions, that abortion providers, if they moved into the city or if they relocated or renovated within the city limits, they would have to be zoned differently than other similar medical providers. And in most cases, this zoning differently would mean that they would have to go through a long process, a long, expensive process in order to be approved. And that process would require several city council hearings, which we know in many places we call that veto by mob. We know that in some cases that would make it impossible for an abortion provider or women's health center to move into the city. So that happened in Fairfax, and unfortunately it passed, although we did everything we could to stop it. And then as we were worried about, we saw it was replicated pretty soon after in Manassas City, which is much less progressive, much more anti-choice, and they implemented something similar. And so this is the way that these restrictions are really playing out on the local level as well as the state level. So we are fighting back. We are working to fix the zoning ordinance in Fairfax to make it more fair, to make it something that applies evenly to all medical providers. And we're also working with municipalities and jurisdictions where there are currently abortion providers to make sure that they're putting proactive zoning measures in place to ensure that clinics cannot be targeted by zoning in this way. So there's a lot happening, but I do think that this is something that's going to continue to play out in future months and years, and I think it's so important. And again, it really, really demonstrates all of the different ways that these folks are trying to shut down clinics and the sneaky ways that they will do it. So that is happening in Virginia, and we do expect that will be replicated elsewhere.
Thank you, Alena. I'm going to put you back on mute, and then very soon I'm going to be unmuting all of our panelists for Q&A. So feel free to type in your questions to the chat box. And I just want to lift up something that Alena just said, which is there's a lot of ways that they're trying to close down abortion clinics. And one thing that we can be certain of, no matter what happens at the Supreme Court, is that our opposition is going to try to find whatever ways they can to close abortion clinics. So this is a fight that's going to be a long slog that we're going to have to remain all in for. So I just briefly want to encourage everyone to check out our new campaign, whoisclosingabortionclinics.org, and to share the graphics on social. We're going to be frequently updating with more graphics, so keep coming back. We'll be pushing them out through our Facebook page and online. So you can find us on Facebook at Reproaction, Twitter, and Instagram. We're Reproaction on all of those. And please sign up for our alerts at www.reproaction.org, not just to learn about this campaign, but also to stay plugged in for direct action opportunities in your community. We're so excited that you're here tonight, and we don't want to lose you. So with the one other thing before I pass it on to Pamela for Q&A is please save the date for our next webinar. It's going to be on Tuesday, May 24th at the same time, and we're going to talk about, back on the theme of punishing people who have abortions, we're going to talk about criminalizing abortion and reproductive health care. So that should be a good webinar, and we hope to see you there. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Pamela to moderate the Q&A and unmute all of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Erin. So again, if you have questions, we will try to get to all of them, but just drop them into the question section on your GoToWebinar control panel. So this first question is going to be for Cole. It's from Morgan, and Morgan would like to know if you, Cola, do you see a space for collaboration between religious groups who aren't anti-LGBTQ abortion to marginalize the radical religious right?
Yes, absolutely. I think you know, I have lots of feelings about the struggle for marriage equality, but one thing that we can learn from that fight is the necessary role that LGBTQ affirming faith voices played in getting us to that win. So I would definitely point people toward RCRC, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, as well as Catholics for Choice. Both of those groups are doing really phenomenal work in offering counter narratives that are so critical.
Awesome, thank you for that answer. So this next question is for Katie from Jessica. Katie, what about creating the Who is Closing Abortion Clinics campaign was most difficult for you?
That's such a good question. I think that the trickiest part for me, honestly, was reading through all the briefs, just because I don't have a whole lot of experience combing through legal documents. So some of the language is like really, some of it was very like legalese, and that was a little like both like time consuming, and also sometimes, you know, I would spend a day reading the briefs and be like, oh my God, like what am I reading right now? So I would say like that was pretty much it. The rest of it felt like a lot more intuitive to me, the research and like the content creation, but all of the legal stuff was a little trickier.
Got it. So I can only imagine. So this question is from Brittany. What can women do locally in Texas to fight legislation like HB2? And I'm going to open that up for whoever wants to tackle it. Or maybe I'll just say Erin.
Oh, hi there. Sorry, I was lurking on mute again. So I think, you know, HB2 is a law, and it's not a situation like the Virginia clinic closure law, as Alena discussed. So it's not something that can be amended through the regulatory process, but we do actually have an amazing opportunity on our hands because HB2 is being challenged in front of the Supreme Court right now. We're expecting a decision to come out in late June. So I'd say at this point, oral arguments have already taken place. Obviously, all of us on this call are activists, and that's our skill set that we can bring to the table. I think one of the most important things that people could do in Texas and around the country is to raise awareness about the bad faith of the actors who are trying to close abortion clinics, and make it clear that's the aim of our campaign, that it has nothing to do with health and safety and everything to do with banning access to abortion. And, you know, the other piece that I think activists can do that's really important is to make sure that we're fighting back against abortion stigma and that we're actually making sure that people who need reproductive health care, people who use reproductive health care, just people are at the center of abortion discussions rather than allowing it to be these abstract conversations about morality or religion. The fact is that 3 in 10 women in this country have abortions. Abortion is a safe and extremely safe procedure. It is a common procedure, and there's no reason that we should still, to this day, allow our media outlets to primarily have men discussing. Often you're more likely to hear from anti-abortion folks. So I think there's just a lot of, at this point, while it's sitting out there with the court for Texas HB2 in general, I'd say some of the best stuff that we can do is awareness raising and, you know, letting the opposition know that we see them and we reveal them, and also not just the opposition, but everyone know that we're proud to stand up for abortion, and that's work we do.
Awesome, thank you for that. So this next question is for Alena. Is the Virginia strategy of a department, and this is from Talon, I'm sorry, is the Virginia strategy of a Department of Health challenge to some of these laws a viable option for other states? Or if they've already been signed into law, does it become part of the state's health regulations? And therefore can't be challenged on these grounds. And I think you answered part of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And I am going to try and put on my policy hat. I wish our policy director was on and can speak to that. My understanding is that we are one of the only states who have this unique situation. However, I'm not sure, but I will say in our case, we were really lucky that not only did we have this opportunity, but because we had someone in office who was able to seize the opportunity and really ran on making sure that he was going to be a brick wall and any further restrictions on abortion. Because we had that governor in office, we were able to take advantage of it. So I know it hasn't started in any other state. I think it's rare for them to have the regulatory opening, but it's also possible that even if they do have regulations, they're unable to order a review of those regulations because of the political or partisan makeup of their executive branch. So those two things are both possible. That being said, I think I would definitely reach out to policy organizations who do this work in your state. You can also reach out to me if you have specific questions, and I can connect you with our national policy department to see if that's an option. But again, I think in most cases it's really just, as Erin said, about advocacy, about making sure people know about these restrictions, know what they mean, know that they're sham laws. And then also, another thing that you can do is just direct service work. So in Texas, for example, there's a Lilith Fund, which is an abortion provider. I'm sorry, not an abortion provider, an abortion fund. There are several other state funds that help to fund abortion for women who need them. Many of them will help if women need to travel or people getting abortions need to, stay overnight in a hotel, that type of stuff. So there's a lot of work that you can do on that front as well, even if you can't make change using the regulatory processes we did.
Got it. So the final question is from Caitlin, and as Caitlin says, please let me know what I can do to contribute in any way. I live in Los Angeles from North Carolina, proud abortion advocate, having had an abortion 7 years ago, and feel the need to throw my weight in on this some way, somehow, beyond sharing my story and voice, if that's at all possible. And Caitlin offers a very encouraging, keep it up. Thank you for that, Caitlin. So I will go ahead and take a first stab at that, because I know we're a little tight on time, and say we strongly encourage you to visit Who is Closing Abortion clinics.org. It's a resource, it's a way to connect to our campaign, and it is our goal of this campaign to raise awareness, but also to empower activists with information. And I also encourage you to sign up for our email lists at reproaction.org, where we will be sending out opportunities to take action and opportunities to learn more about direct action in your community. So thank you for the question. With that, it is 7, and we pride ourselves on being prompt here at Reproaction and not holding people beyond 7. So I would like to, again, thank our panelists, Alena, Katie, and Cole, for this wonderful information, and thank you, all of you, for as always, and we will see you again for the next month's Act and Learn webinar. Thanks so much.